and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck your little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my road shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose the big holes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Welcome to Voice of Rebellion on UCY TV with Chris and we are live.
Hey, it is Chris J here. This is Voice of Rebellion Radio. It is the February 28th. We are. This is the last show, actually, of the month, and wow, it's like winter flew by pretty quick, and now today's show is going to be a pretty big one. I think it's going to be a pretty big one because I like at times telling these political stories that have never been told many times, especially not here in the Western countries, not here in the United States. It seems like I told the story about Tito and the long extent that I did in his allies, non-aligned movement, and I think that this ties into it somewhat with Arab socialism, and it's a political story that hasn't been told. I mean, this is almost in a way of a documentary, I guess you could say. I'll be doing the show in. Definitely, we'll take colors this time, and that was the 100th episode where I did the story about Tito and the non-aligned movement, and that was. You know, I was actually down in Colombia, so if the audio quality on the show wasn't the greatest, well, I apologize. The Wi-Fi wasn't the greatest then. Hopefully now on this big show, the audio quality will be a bit better. And you know, this is a political ideology kind of unique to really the whole world, and it's not really just something that influences only Arab countries, but influences a lot of the different leaders, a lot of different revolutionary politicians, I guess, around the world as an alternative to many of the systems that we see nowadays. And you know, it's that we've been limited in the activist community nowadays. Really, this is where it really ties into the activists that have been. It either seems to be the orthodox Marxist-Leninist communists or the capitalist, you know, anarcho-capitalist, these different ideologies, and there's some stuff in between or whatever. There's this big one that's forgotten, the big elephant in the room, and these people, I would say, it's the socialists who don't go to the mainstream, don't go to, when it comes to the mainstream socialist movement, don't go necessarily rush into the love and support of Lenin or to, you know, unfortunately, we see a lot of the support. They go rushing towards Stalin or Mao in order to and showing people as people that are not. It is true that they were real dictators that relied on a power structure, went straight to them, and ultimately sold our countries out to foreign forces, especially Mao. With his government being surrounded, if you can check this out, of foreigners that had no real connection to China. China suffered for many years under Mao, 45 million killed under Mao, and unfortunately, a lot of the YouTube socialists nowadays will will make Mao seem like a great revolutionary person, but really he was a counter-revolutionary. A lot of these peasants that have fought for a fair system for the poor Chinese ultimately made a worse system than what existed. It was not, I would say, it was not as bad under the KMT, under Chiang Kai-shek, than it was for Mao, who arguably goes down as maybe the most murderous dictator of the 20th century. His body came up. I don't know. There's also Cecil Rhodes was in the same century. That was early in the 1900s, and he killed many different estimates. But I've seen 10 to 60 million. I think more around the 10 million. Still an atrocious dictator. He was actually an imperialist who pretty much kind of had control over Zimbabwe, which made them lose all their customs, their culture, turned it into Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes. The guy who said that to be born British is to win the lottery of life, as he saw British as superiority as one of his main purposes in life, to push that on the African people by killing them, by doing mass murders throughout Africa, and really just a reign of terror and tyranny that he left in Zimbabwe. Arab socialism is a unique ideology. It's not. The weird thing is, it's not exactly. It has connections somewhat to Marx, but it doesn't. When it comes to this theoretical, or who do they idol? They don't really idol Lenin, the Soviet Union. In fact, they really didn't like the Soviet Union. That was one of the main points of it, was to give Arab countries an alternative to the systems that were being appointed to them by the Zionists in the United States, the West, and the so-called East, the Soviet Union, or Mao's China. The Soviet Union, they didn't really get into the Arab countries because there's somewhat of distrust for them in those countries. But we're actually talking really before they had really been global with their influence, or really the United States. When the United States, they had already started their imperialist influence around the world, but it wasn't nearly to the height it would be in the 60s or 70s yet. When we're talking this ideology started, we really boomed in the 30s, and that was under the ideology started. Two men founded it in the 30s, and they kind of robbed each other, and then we went out and would change the destiny of the ideology in the long run. The one guy's name was Michael Affleck, I believe is what I wrote down here, and the other guy, which Affleck, it's not like the commercial or the Ben Affleck, the actor. It's spelled a little bit differently, if I'm pronouncing that right. Or I think it's like Mikhail Affleck. Michael Affleck might be possibly the name, and then Zaki Al-Arguzi. Around 1939, the ideology is formed out of also I think it was partially an alternative to what was becoming pretty popular in the Middle East, especially North Africa, where this ideology would eventually take a big foothold. Nazis had been pushed upon the Middle Eastern people, kind of like how corporate fascism in the United States is being pushed upon them by the New World Order. Is pushing this on the Middle Eastern people was like Nazism was being pushed at that time in the 1930s on across the Middle East via the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, the Allies in World War II, they had to face just as many Nazis as Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood was the proxy of the Nazis in North Africa. Later on, in the 1950s and into the Cold War, after World War II, it gets turned over to the British and becomes a British proxy, and they turn it into a pro-Western group to spread Western imperialism on the Arab people in a so-called religious organization. And nowadays it's a United States group to push pro-U.S. policies, and they've done a lot of havoc across the Middle East over the years. They started, really, the Syrian Civil War was not the first time that a Western-supported terrorist uprising happened in the country in '82 against Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad. In Hama, there was a big uprising of Muslim Brotherhood against Hafez al-Assad. Back in the 1950s, a Muslim Brotherhood attempted to kill, while Nasser wasn't yet president, I believe, in Egypt, they attempted to kill Gamal Nasser, as I've mentioned before, the president of Egypt from 1956 to 1970, I believe, who would bring Egypt much further into the modern times, would push a lot of people into the middle class. And Gamal Nasser and Hafez al-Assad's assassination attempts on them by the Muslim Brotherhood proved that the Muslim Brotherhood don't have a revolutionary past like some people in the activist community. I would say it's mostly I would say it's like the Trotskyist sector of the socialist, of the mainstream socialist movement, I guess, maybe is the ones that seem to be really pushing this. The Muslim Brotherhood is not the bad guys here, but ultimately, Muslim Brotherhood also may create havoc against Christians in Egypt. They're a CIA-supported group, and Egypt has called them out and stuff. And I'm not really that big of a fan of Abdel Sisi, the current president of Egypt. However, I do think he is a better alternative than the Muslim Brotherhood in a few ways. I don't know overall, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be that ultimately, people say that Charlton has been. I think they always get things mixed up. That they said that Morsi was anti-Zionist and Sisi is pro-Zionist, which ultimately I think they're just most. I think Morsi was really ultimately was just a peace broker, and really was a talking head for the Zionists in the United States when to make it seem all okay that what they were doing to the Palestinians. And I would say Sisi, actually, the claims don't seem to be really. They seem to be based on a few of his mistakes. However, he's done a few things for the Palestinians. But yeah, I think he's ultimately, at best, a lukewarm Palestinian supporter. That's why I don't really like Sisi. I believe that he might be ultimately back in Tel Aviv's pocketbooks. And he's definitely no, like, an Arab socialist like Nasser or something like that could actually, somebody that actually has progressed this country much further. But there hasn't been in a long time he's been in power. But, Nasser, he hit the ground running, and he progressed his country very far in just the first few years of his presidency. Really, most of what he got done was really in the first 10 years or so, because his last 5 was riddled with war and kind of losing his grip against on the power that he had at one point. Nasser had a very stressful last 5 years, from 1965 to 1970. There's a lot of major things going on in the Middle East that he was involved in. And Nasser, he was unique in the fact that he was a leader like that opposed to U.S. imperialism, Zionism, the New World Order, the Rothschilds. At that time, before there was a few leaders like that, like we've seen today, that have been like that for 30, 40 plus years, a couple countries now. However, that time was somewhat unique because at that point, really, it wasn't many years after all of the Middle East just looked like a giant checkerboard of European colonies. And now now it's all sovereign, and there's been some of these countries went through some changes. Some have been unified. They used to be different countries, and now there's a potential of some of these countries splitting up. However, I would say, one of the things that was rumored about Syrian Kurdistan splitting away from the rest of Syria. Well, now since the Kurds in Syria and the government of Syria, Assad, teamed up against the terrorists, now it seems like there's a high potential that the Kurdish leadership will support staying part of Syria. And any Kurdistan would actually be made the Iraqi Kurds and maybe the Iranian Kurds could form their own country of Kurdistan. But it doesn't seem the Syrian Kurds would break away from Syria and become their own country, which I think would weaken the country of Syria if they broke away, even though it might provide a good buffer between Syria and Turkey. But I don't think it would be good for either, because then they would be highly susceptible to any terrorism coming in from Turkey. So I don't think that the Syrian Kurds should seek independence, but definitely they have held it off, and they won't really talk about it with Assad and these Kurdish won't really talk about it until this war ends, whenever that may be. Which ultimately, there's no telling. This war could go on. Well, I would say that this war seems to be coming up to a wrap now, but the ceasefire seems to be not holding up right now. That they actually just started yesterday. The ceasefire was started. However, I don't think the ceasefire is going to hold up because of the fact that the United States government will continue to fund the terrorists that have no interest in supporting the ceasefire. And I don't think really any of the supposed opposition, these terrorists in Syria that are wreaking havoc are really interested in any kind of peace deal. I think ultimately is that they're just going to keep fighting until they're put down. And I think ultimately it's going to be Russia's job if the United States doesn't intervene, or it's going to be Iran's job to continue putting them down until I guess the United States intervenes. I just see many situations where the U.S. intervenes, like I said, just to be very imminent in the talks that it was the United States having this threat of invasion close at hand. It seems unlikely that any kind of peace agreement could happen in Syria that'd be long-standing. It's a very tricky situation in Syria because of the United States' unwillingness to look for any kind of peace deal that doesn't completely benefit them. And one of the things is that they want Assad gone, and the 80% of the people don't want Assad gone. The United States is trying to impose a will that the people do not want Syria, which is what is being done is what they've always done in the Middle East. It goes all the way back to the time of Nasser. The funny thing is that at the time of Nasser, they were kind of coerced into being against Nasser, because at first Eisenhower wanted to create a relationship with Nasser. I'm not sure whether he knew what he was about, or maybe they exactly trying to do a good move here, but the Zionists didn't allow it. So what they did was they activated a terror cell inside of Egypt to attack the United States soldiers in Egypt, and then they would say, well, Nasser let this attack happen, and it happened, from what I understand. And then after that, they decided that, well, we're not going to have good relations with Nasser because if we can't trust them, and we're going to support Israel over Nasser. And then they'll put into the United States on the Zion side on that one topic, which was Egypt, and Nasser, the core of the Arab socialist movement in the 50s. Which in the 50s, this is where Arab socialism had been reformed from the original part, because at first it was more of a dream, and it was more of a nationalist thing. There were some more economic things put into it in the 50s. And there was more of actual true ideology. This thing originated in 1939, and it really, for the first 11 years, remained dormant in the Middle East until it started became some more support in Egypt in favor of it. And for Nasser, as he rose through the ranks, at first he wasn't the first president of Egypt, actually. Actually, the British protectorate of Egypt, the monarchy there, fell apart. Actually, Mohammed Naguib became the president of Egypt, but he was there for a short time, and Nasser, one of the highest-ranking men, took power, was to support the people. In 1956, he becomes the president, and is put into a tricky situation with the Zionist power expanding, and at the same time, you have the two powers, the Soviet Union and the United States, that are going to be trying to push their will on the countries of the Middle East and the third world in general. And I think that's what the Arabs in South America, they have in common, that for a long time the United States have been trying to push their will in these countries via coup, via wars, via all kinds of tactics that are sneaky in order to do the New World Order agenda of putting the third world in the hands of the Rothschilds. And ultimately, one of the things the Rothschilds want to do once they have these countries in their hands is depopulation. I mean, that's what Henry Kissinger said, is that the best policy for the third world is depopulation, and that's part of the plan. And people think that's nutty, depopulation, just read their words. And it definitely goes in the favor of then depopulation, because when there's less of us, people that could revolt, they have less chance of being overthrown. There's the thing is that there's one thing that they don't have that we have that makes them very easy to be overthrown, is that we have the numbers. They might have the money, they might have the resources, but we have numbers. And ultimately, if we, the people, took the power of the resources with the power of the people we have, the revolution would be all but inevitable. That's and ultimately what I just described there. Well, there's one thing that there's one thing that when people think about socialism, people come up with all these bizarre things, like especially the college kids don't know anything about what they're talking about. Supporting Sanders, they say that's about government giving you this, government giving you that. No, it's the people seizing the means of production and seizing the resources, I think, is another way to see it, like what they've done in Venezuela, where the people control, well, they get the benefits of the oil rather than big corporations getting the benefits of the oil and taking all the profits back to the United States, where they have their greedy hands on it and plow the rich buddies. And, there's a couple of main differences between this kind of socialism, Arab socialism, and the mainstream socialism. And one of them is that, I guess, is that, unlike in the Soviet Union or Mao's China or whatever, it seems atheism is heavily promoted. In these countries, it's very combined with the already traditional culture, because this is a different kind of socialism. This is a kind of socialism in one country, and I think when you put a nationalist effort into it, or it's focused on the country and the culture of that country, you respect the country's religions, their customs that they already have, rather than trying to change it into something it's not, in order to go into some grand vision of what you're going to make the country like. In Venezuela, for example, the Christianity is heavily embraced. Chavez heavily embraced his love for Jesus Christ, and I think that's one of the characteristics that set him aside for when people think of socialism. I think it's atheistic leaders, these people that put themselves as the highest power, is what I think people might think. But these people, there's a few of them, that realize that there's a higher power above them, and that they should just try to do what they perceive to be his work, and help the poor, and help the masses, rather than just catering to a few in themselves. One of the people that people forget is an Arab socialist, and one of the most influential leaders of all time in Africa, one of the greatest leaders of all time in Africa. One of the people that people forget had the influence he had, Muammar Gaddafi, which he took power on September 1st, 1969, in a coup against King Idris. He was sum it up for you, he was a bad leader with his tyranny. His police would brutalize people, and he was in the Zionist pocketbooks, and he used his oil was ultimately going to help the West and not the people. So, there was big demonstrations against him by the poor classes of Libya, because he just kept him the select elite in power of the country. And he was the leader from all the way from the independence all the way to 1969. So he was a leader for quite a long time, over 1.5 decades he was in power before Gaddafi would take power. And Gaddafi had a whole different vision based on the poor, based on one thing, overthrowing the Rothschilds. And he made a new country, changed it from the Libyan monarchy to the Libyan Arab Republic, and they changed the flag. They kind of based it on Nasser's Egypt, and his Arab socialism there was pretty much what he based the first party of Libya that was in power, that he was controlled, and the people of Libya heavily benefited from his reign in the first 8 years of his power, and Libya went way further. I mean, the country was a very poor third world country, well behind 1969 standards of life, I would say, when it comes to, they were living practically what might as well be the teens of the 20s of America. They were really just also a country with very little civil liberties. It was a very bad place to be under the king's rule, and the king was deposed without any blood, and Gaddafi gets the power. He's very young at this point. I mean, he was in his 20s when he took power. I mean, the only leader like that nowadays is Kim Jong-un, which I'm not going to even compare even close between Kim Jong-un and Gaddafi, but Kim Jong-un, I think he took power when he was in his, I think he was 28 when he took power. And that's about around the age Gaddafi took power. And he was, it was kind of naive is what Nasser described him as. And Nasser watched his rise to power, and Nasser was pretty much the main person who taught Gaddafi, and that's why Gaddafi resembled many of the attributes of Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at the time of him taking power. However, just about a year after Gaddafi takes power, Nasser dies in Egypt. He had a heart attack at the age of 52. It was pretty tragic, and he dies and then leaves the country with a very big power vacancy. And this is after a long period of stress. In fact, there was just a crisis that he was dealing with where a couple countries in the Middle East were fighting, and he pretty much had brokered a peace deal between the two, and just after that, he died. This is right after the Arab Summit. I mean, hours after the Arab Summit, he had a heart attack, and he died within hours of that. And that was the third. He wasn't in great health. That was one thing, because he had lived such a stressful life from an assassin. I mean, he came a long way from, when he was became an adult in the 30s. He was born in 1918. He became an adult in the 30s under the British Protectorate of Egypt, and slowly rose up in the ranks. And so in the 50s, when he was in a position to take power, and then in 1956 he became president after he already had been assassination attempts against Nasser. There already had been so much stuff that happened with his life, and he now was the president and had to deal with a very aggressive Zionist Israel to his right. He had to deal with was pretty much an Israeli puppet in a giant country that the Israeli puppet ran. King Idris and his Libya to the left, and to the north were a bunch of countries that really didn't like that any of these countries that really grew up really shown their sovereignty against Europe. They really didn't like that. Which the Eastern Bloc ultimately, in the Warsaw Pact had just been formed, actually. It was formed the same year, Warsaw Pact of 56. And over there in the West is NATO and all its countries, and the United States also, from at the very beginning, had its eyes on Nasser, but weirdly enough, at the beginning, was in favor of Nasser, and I think they even had a weapons deal with Nasser at the very beginning. However, after the Levant affair, after Israel activates its soldiers in Egypt, that came to an end, and they flipped the sides after the Levant affair. Levant affair and U.S.'s liberty really shows the special relationship that Israel and the United States have, doesn't it? And, by the way, if anybody wants to call in during any time of the show, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296 on this show of this other story that we are telling about Arab socialism, Gaddafi, Hafez al-Assad, I'll get to him a bit later, Nasser, all throughout North Africa, the Arab socialists, this movement that seems to have not a lot of coverage here in the West. A lot of these stories are not covered, and I think that's one of the great things of having a show like this is that you get to cover it, and that a lot of people will listen to your show, and a lot of people will be educated about something that they really didn't have much knowledge about before. And also another thing people forget is that under Nasser, there was actually a union was made between Nasser's Egypt and Syria between 1958 and 1961, which Syria at the time was ran by kind of I think the leftist ran Syria at that time, until later, I think it was almost like ultimately a right-wing, more fascist type of government took over right afterwards, which they would be taken out by the Ba'ath Party in 1963. But at that time, there was a union between the two countries, and which was also showed an unprecedented amount of unity in the Middle East that Nasser was bringing. You could see that he was able to do that by bringing peace deals, by bringing the Arab peoples together, and their people were all looking in Egypt's direction and saying, "We want to be like them. This country is inspiring us to revolt against these old monarchies and revolt against the leftover imperialist elements that are left in the Middle East and the Zionist control of the Middle East that people that are already been established." It's a weird thing that Israel talks about. Yeah, they always say that, especially at the beginning, they all hated us. They still all hate us. Now they have these countries in their pocketbooks, and they all have trade relations. They all are very supportive of Israel, and are pretty much for. Not pretty sure. They are for the Israeli massacre of the Palestinian people, and that's how it was still back then in the 50s. And Saudi Arabia and Libya at the time before Gaddafi had taken power. Now Libya once again is pro-Zionist since Gaddafi has been overthrown, and now a terrorist regime supported by NATO has taken over the country. It's very interesting, the attitudes by Western leftists at times about Arab countries, and they'll talk very bad about these different Arab leaders that brought sovereignty to their country. Talk about these leaders that actually pushed their country way to modern times by civil liberties and services that were not provided in the country before. But and then they'll call them dictators. They'll call them religious extremists. Which the funny thing about that is that's a very racist assumption to make, is that without any research, they say that automatically that this person's been called a dictator in the Middle East must be a religious extremist, because everybody in the Middle East is a religious extremist. When actually these leaders, especially like Hafez al-Assad, brought a secular country about where all Christians, Muslims, even Jews all experience equal rights, compared to, and they'll support these terrorists that actually want to bring a country that's actually a Sharia law state, because they believe they're rebels. That's just the wording, like the Syrian rebels. But ultimately, the Syrian rebels are just a bunch of terrorists. You couldn't convince many of the Western people or the American people of this, that the Syrian rebels are actually terrorists. But the Syrian people were easily convinced on the fact that they're being crucified, they're being beheaded by the Free Syrian Army, as well as Islamic Front, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all these other groups. They have no consideration of what the people over there have to say, where 70% of Syria is actually in support of Bashar al-Assad, compared to the Syrian rebels, which have they have negligible support. And over in Libya, where now probably the overwhelming majority wishes they were still in the times of Gaddafi, compared to this, they want the times of Gaddafi compared to this terrorist ridden country that they suffer in now, where ISIS controls big parts of the country. These other moderate rebels control other parts of the country, which are now these are terrorists that are in control of the country. The people that the government that is taken over is a terror supporting regime supported by Zionist Israel and supported by the United States and NATO, the same people that killed thousands of their people during the 2011 invasion. And it took 2 tries. And that's what I fear, is that the second try seems to be a lot successful oftentimes if they figure out the formula of success, the elites, how to dismantle a country. In 85, they bombed Libya, and they didn't overthrow Gaddafi. In 2001, they tried again, and they overthrew Gaddafi. In 82, they started a terrorist uprising in Syria to overthrow Assad, and now, in 2011, they started another terrorist uprising. Different groups, but still terrorist uprising in Syria to overthrow Assad. So far unsuccessful, and actually looks like Russia's mopping the floor with them, but now Russia stopped striking due to the ceasefire. The Russia and Syria are actually trying to hold up, but it looks like, of course, ISIS, al-Nusra, all these groups are not holding up the ceasefire. But what we really in question is these supposed moderate rebels. Well, we're going to see will they hold up in the ceasefire, but they're not going to hold up in the ceasefire. They're the same people who use chemical weapons against their own people. The Syrian rebels, not the Syrian government. The Syrian rebels use chemical weapons against their own people. Or these the same people that chop off their own citizens' heads, and we expect them to hold up to on ceasefire. I'm just saying is that ultimately the only solution, the best case scenario, is Russia goes in there, cleans the house and takes out all these rebels and takes out all the terrorists in Syria, lets Assad to handle any future disruptions in the peace, and hopefully the United States doesn't get involved somehow. And if that happens, well, then we have a successful solution. However, that's unlikely, considering that the United States won't get their greedy fingers into it, and Zionist paws will also be right there, because Israel's been attacking Syria and bombing them, and there's been also helping these terrorists by giving them medical care back in Israel. Even ISIS fighters have been reported to have been seen getting medical care in Israel, in Tel Aviv, hospitals over there. So the Zionist paws definitely all over Syria, and they'll still be all over Syria, even if there is a solution, a peace that becomes permanent. Now we're 5 years into this almost. This, in just a few weeks, will mark the 5-year point of the war, and just absolutely tragic. 400,000. Some people are estimating at least 300,000 people are dead because of the war. Hundreds of thousands injured, millions displaced. It's almost complete destruction of many parts of the country, and only people that really didn't see, Damascus didn't see too much of the fighting. It's really one of the places where the war didn't come to. The wars came to Aleppo, the wars came to Raqqa, the wars came to many of the major cities, Palmyra, and the desert, all these little rural towns on the desert have been controlled by ISIS for a long time, and now are finally being liberated. Raqqa might be liberated soon from ISIS, which Raqqa has been the self-proclaimed by ISIS capital in Syria, and their capital, their whole caliphate, their country that they're supposedly making, which will be just a United States entity of Saudi Arabia, would be in support of the United States and Israel. It's really, if you look at the Zionist plans back in around 1900, some of the original plans, what they're taking seems much like what the Zionists wanted to take back then. I'm going to go to the chat room and see what's going on here. If drop off, I'll apologize for that, but I want to see what's going on there, what kind of buzz I'm starting there. And the people also automatically assume that any kind of leader that is in the Middle East, despot, that is a tyrant, and they think that the Middle Eastern people can't determine their own sovereignty. They completely ignore their own will, because it's ultimately an ingrained racism that exists towards the Middle Eastern people, is that they believe that they're backwards, they believe that they're goat humpers and whatever, because the media has put that in their heads. And they'll say, oh yeah, we're not racist, which is bullshit. The media has ingrained racism into the American people's heads against Muslims. And who really benefits from hate against Muslims? The Zionists. And keeping us, the Christians, the Muslims, and even the Jews that are against Zionism divided, really benefits Israel. It really benefits the Zionists that are in control of the United States government, the Zionist fascists. You know, these people are also fascists as well, but that's also partially, I mean, we're talking about the economic policy. Fascism is a merger of corporate and state power. Zionism is a warped idea that Jewish supremacy, not necessarily by religion, but by blood, and also is also the Jewish homeland, supposedly, of taking land that not theirs and that they have no connection to, really. So it's a little bit different, but Zionism has its grip even in the Middle East, with a lot of the people, I believe, are brainwashed, and that's why a lot of the Saudis probably are brainwashed and believe supporting the Saudi government, or they live in fear of being attacked by brutally by retribution by the Saudi by the Saudi government if they were ever to uprise against them, or these other countries where the Zionists have the Zionist proxy government, Bahrain, Qatar. And Qatar, and all of them play this game like they say, oh yeah, we're not so pro-Zionist or whatever, but we're actually pro-Palestinian. There's no proof for it. There's no
Okay, I think we lost Chris there. And I'm just making a post right now. Nathan Frazier's coming up here in about an hour and 20 minutes. Let me pop back down here to Skype. Yeah, I'm off mute. Yeah. So, yep, Chris fell off, but I suspect he will be back directly. So, anyways, I was just doing a little promo in here for myself.
Hey,
there he is.
Happened. I left the app just go to the chat room and I dropped off.
Yeah. Hey, if you'd like, you can call in by phone and run your tablet over there too. However you want to do it, brother.
I'll do the audio quality today. It was last week better.
Yeah, it was better on the telephone, honestly. When you, of course, it's a lot harder to do there. If you've got a headset, you can plug in your phone. I find that does really well a lot of times. So then you can keep track with everything else if you'd like. It's up to you, bro. And also, hey, I'm expecting a call here, and if it'd be all right with you, we may want to interrupt just for a few minutes. He's going to call me here at home, and then we're going to talk some. It's got a sheriff out west that's going to be kind of taking a stand up for the situation out west there in Oregon and Nevada. So a good friend of mine, I'm not going to say who it is until I get confirmation from him, but I know him from Buckerville, and he was in Burns, and he's in a bit of a sticky situation, and he'll elaborate further. So if he wants to come to air there, if he can get here in time, he's waiting on something to happen. But can I interrupt you, Chris? You're breaking up real bad. I can't hear you. It looks like it might be on my end. No, it's not on my end. Or is it? Chris, can you call in by phone? Let's see if that's it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. We may want to disconnect this call and try it again. Let me call her over to UCY.TV. Oh, I think it was me. I must have fell off here. Call back, Chris. Okay, I hung up and reconnected here. I think that might have been my end actually there with the problem. Yeah, I've got some type of problem going on here. I don't know if this is coming through yet or not. Well, I think that I've got a problem here. I'm not sure if anybody can hear me. I went to refresh the chat room. It's gone. Hey, dude, can you hear me? Okay, let's try this again. Yeah, I hope this is okay. I'm going to add Chris back. I hope this is working. I don't know what's going on here. All right, let's add him up here. See if this works. I got knocked off here on this end for some reason. Looks like my strength is back here. And we're waiting on Chris. Ice that will come here in a minute. We just I think we're back finally. We have connected. That's strange. It's up and looks like juked again here. I've got some. It's not my equipment. It's got to be the server to the phone company. So I'm not sure if you guys are even hearing me right now. It's looking good. I had a problem with this a week or two ago and called the phone company. And it was not even Marion. It was where they were receiving their service from. So I'll click Chris again. Let's see if this works. It looks dark. Oh boy, I'm not sure. There's Nathan Frazier gives me a thumbs up, anyways. And hey, let me go here and just post this. I was trying to get his page to tag with this post, Live Free FM. Nathan Frazier's coming up in about an hour and 10 minutes. And it's not allowing a tag there for some reason, because of the shenanigans. Anyways, I'll post that. It's a little self-promotion too. Check out my website, whatmattersworldwide.yolasite.com, YOLASITE. So yeah, you can find Nathan Frazier there, along with several other greats like Jules and Chuck Horton, and a great many more in the schools of the autodidact on What Matters Worldwide. Hey, I'm here, I'm going to post it so Nathan gets his name all over the internet. He's famous now because I put his name up. Right. Well, let me go back over here and try to get Chris again. I won't. Doggone it. Sorry, you guys. And we're going to try to add you again here, Chris. I wonder. We are broadcasting now, I assume. I'm going to go back over here and actually click on a player. And, okay. Cowboy said, well, I'm back over yonder. I'm going to click over here and open up. What the heck? Oh, there it is. I'm going to open this up in a new tab over here and see if I got a player playing. Click to connect. I've been kicked, it looks like, from everywhere. Right here. Unable to connect. I may not be even on air. I'm not sure. Do not think so, and I can't get back in. Well, of all things. There's a message on Skype. Chris is trying to dial in. It looks like we're making connection now. There's Chris.
And we're back live with Vince.
Okay, I'm pretty sure that was my end, Chris. Had a problem a week or two ago. Internet got knocked off, and it wasn't even the phone company. It was where they get theirs from. So it looked like it was the same symptoms. Anyways, let me try to get back on UCY over here. In the UCY.
It actually says we're on UCY already.
Yeah, we are on now. So yeah, I got the player on, so I'll kill that one. Oops, I think I killed.
Okay, so
one.
yes, we are back live. Sorry about that technical difficulties there. Where I left off, but into the first 8 7 8 7 months and each.
Chris, I'm sorry. You're breaking up. I'm not sure if it's my end now. I've got all my bells and whistles ringing and lit up. Hey, can you call in by phone? Let me try to add you by phone and see if that's any better.
Again.
All right. Try by phone, I'm saying. Well, I'm still trying to get the UCY.TV chat page to reconnect. I do believe this is all even before mine. It's not. Okay, I'm refreshing it. So, as we wait for Chris to call him by phone. Dadgummit. This is bad. Well, still not even sure. Looks like I've gotten problems again here. Well, I hear me. Yeah, I've got the player going. I'm going to stop that there. Yeah. Why is it not I can't get into the UCY.TV chat. Okay, thanks, Cowboy. I'm on. Vinny was even knocked off. Yeah, it's knocking me all the way off over here. I'm going to try to open this in a new tab. UCY.TV. So, wow, I can't get in. What's up? I wonder, just wonder how sensitive the conversation I've been having, because yeah, everybody knows Facebook is fascist book. I wonder how much of this inboxing over here that I'm having with this individual from, and he may not be safe just everywhere. Chris says it won't connect. Let me just try to add you again then. Trying to add you back by Skype, Chris. Yeah, there we go.
I just want to just had a oh, this is a value see where it's just a
Chris? Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
hear me?
Yeah, it's breaking up. How's Chris sounding there, Cowboy Tech? It'll take about 33 seconds to get down the line. I'm afraid there's an internet problem downstream or upstream for me, I guess I'd say. It seems to be having some hokiness going on. But anyways, if you'd like, Chris, I don't know if you wouldn't be able to take calls, but if you want to go ahead and hang up and connect yourself to the network, and I'll drop out. I don't know. That might be the option we have to go with right now. You're gonna have. Yeah, you're breaking up so bad. You're gonna have to text me what in. Yeah, I can't hear you. So I'm asking, shall I hang up and let you? It's probably banging pretty loud if you hear me. Well, so Chris is gone from there, and I don't know if I should hang up until I earphone, and I don't even know if I'm connected because it ain't playing. Let me try to turn on the player, and I ain't hearing nothing. Hello, hello. One little. Let me look at this. I'll tell you what, if you can hear me, I'm hanging up. Wait a minute. Like a cat falling off a dresser. Thanks. Hal Anthony behind the woodshed. There's Chris back. Chris?
I figured the problem was because I think
I'm afraid the problem's on my end.
They look connected or weekly connected.
Yeah, Chris, I'm afraid the problem's on my end. I believe upstream I'm having some problems with the internet server here. Hey, if you can hear me, uh,
You let me call you. You try to my phone. It wasn't on me. When I tried to call the DCU channel itself, so I figured that. I mean, my wife is in that full bar now, so that's the problem I had. I don't sure I mean, that's from my
brother, I can't even understand you. Can you understand me?
that's a new call actually. So I don't know. But I tried to call in UCY radio. There was no, they wouldn't even pick up the phone.
Well, that's because I don't know if you was trying to connect to the network, but listen, if I hang up, you may be able to connect. You won't be able to take any phone calls. Let me,
Yeah, that's
if you'd like to do that, let me try to dial in right now. Just give it a test. Sorry about this, Chris. This one's on my end here, or at least upstream for me. I'm probably going to reach Dr. Simon.
well, and
Yeah, it's not very.
tell me when you message.
Okay,
Message,
so
you have to hang up
put my
and
headphone
just
back.
call. We'll have to call in and just start it. Well, I guess because someone will just be judged off the.
So listen, Chris, can you hear me?
Yeah, I've been crazy the whole time.
Okay, well, I can't hear you, so I think it's my end. Why don't I hang up and let you Skype into UCY and host the rest of this call for the
That's
next
what I'm
hour?
saying.
Okay? I'm assuming you're saying okay. I'm hanging up. Love and peace, y'all.
Sorry, everybody. We're back on the air finally. This is Chris J. It looks like the technical difficulties will be done for the rest of the show. Only problem will be that the phone lines will be closed until the rest of the show. For the rest of the show, until the rest of the show ends. So, let me get back to where I was talking about. I mean, I don't even know where I was talking about, but okay, I was talking about Gaddafi. The great task that he did, and stuff. The great task he had at hand when he took over the country, and Gaddafi in 1977 actually created the new country, the new Libya, the great country that we now look at, and those people in the truth movement, a lot of us look back at all what he did. And he made the Jamahiriya, which was which meant the masses, save the masses, I believe is what it meant, and the country was based around the poor, it wasn't just a few elites running the country like it was before under the Kingdom of Libya, and the country. It's weird because people think that Gaddafi was the sole ruler, all the power was to him, nobody else had the power. But the truth was that all these the People's Council of the Green Libya was really where a lot of the power laid, and up there. Instead where the power lied there, and of course Gaddafi. But Gaddafi also, ultimately almost had like a guiding position. The power lied in the Green Libya in the People's Council that is set up, which is it's even more representative of the people, I would say, than a parliamentary democracy. Power lied there, but in Gaddafi, he was more of a guiding position, and there was power lied there as well. However, with his guiding position, he guided the path of the country and made a Libya that was much more powerful. Well, that was much more of a player in Africa. Used the oil for social programs for his people, and
kicked out the Rothschilds and stopped trading dollars for oil and the massive oil supply that Libya had. People forget how big of a continent Africa is, and then at the same time forget how big these countries are. Libya was a pretty large country and had a lot of oil, a lot of resources, and the people retook the power of the resources after the revolution in '69, and then 1977, I would say, was somewhat of a moving forward with the revolution, was the creation of the Jamahiriya. And before that, in '75, Gaddafi wrote a very important book that may be the most important book in Arab socialism. People, when they talk about communism, they'll say the Communist Manifesto. When people talk about capitalism, they'll probably point out to a book they'll go to either a book by the Wealth of Nations, which, man, the name's not even coming to me right now. Who wrote that? But I'm from the 1700s, or the maybe a book by von Mises, more anarcho-capitalist community or whatever. And I guess if another the outline, the fascists, of course, they'll go back to Mein Kampf or one of Mussolini's books, or what many of these other fascist dictators or whatever, one of their books that they wrote or might have wrote was ghostwriters or whatever. I mean, they all, it's question, they act like they're great authors or whatever from some shitty book they wrote that they didn't even write. Gaddafi actually wrote the Green Book, and it was, a lot of the content was a little bit spotty. For example, there was stuff that was kind of like, obvious stuff. The Green Book is more than just a political book. It should be mentioned, and for the people outside that read it, they shouldn't take it as a political book. It was a book that as children they read, and it was kind of a vision for their lives, what they would become in their lives, and what kind of values should they look at. So it had stuff that wasn't necessarily political in there, and it's a short book. It's like less than 100 pages, but it does really break down the problems with the European parliamentary democracies that he saw at the time, and also the same problems that he saw with the Soviet Union, which he quoted, I think, was saying that it was too atheistic, and was I think he also said that it was just too it was just ultimately another type of tyranny where how he saw it was that their culture wasn't really able to flourish under that. It was replaced by the Soviet entity. He talks about the Zionism and the solution that he has in mind, which is one state where Israel is not there. Now he calls it Israeltine, trying to combine the cultures. However, the Israeli culture is a made-up culture. Now, there's a difference between the Jewish and the Arab cultures. Those are real cultures that exist there. So I don't know if it should have been called Israeltine, maybe a different term, maybe just Palestine. But it was definitely, he had a solid solution, I would say, was his one-state solution. And he believed that the two-state solution wouldn't work just because of the fact that that it's not much land to be splitting two countries out of. Gaddafi also, over the years, he said some very radical statements, and one of the last things he said, in '08, he talked about, he believed JFK was assassinated not by Lee Harvey Oswald, but actually very powerful forces, including the Zionists. He called that Obama would be the disappointment that he was, and would not be the figure of change, would not be the figure of changing the order of the United States that people thought he was in '08. Gaddafi called that early. Gaddafi supported different liberation movements across the world. He supported Polisario Sahara Front, which is a part of Morocco that wants to split away from Morocco. He supported I believe, the Algerian movement quite heavily. Well, actually, Nasser supported the Algerian movement quite heavily as he watched it unfold, where de Gaulle gave independence from France to Algeria, and they were allowed to make their own country, a very large country as well. And Gaddafi, I believe, towards the end, also had pretty good relations with Mugabe, who wasn't even a Muslim or an Arab. It was just how he saw it, because Gaddafi was very strong pro-Africanist, and he saw a very strong African leader that opposed imperialism
and was being attacked by imperialist forces, and he decided to take the side of Mugabe and was being attacked by the United States via economic warfare. And Gaddafi took the side of Mugabe after he took power in the 80s. And Gaddafi, he was, of course, we know that he was in power for a long time, 42 years, and saw a lot of changes unfold in Africa. From when Gaddafi took power, Nasser was in power, and Gaddafi was deposed from power and murdered brutally. Mubarak had already fallen, and the path for Morsi to take power was on its way. That's how much that neighbor changed. Also, another thing to be noted is that at the time of 1969, Rhodesia was named as Zimbabwe, and it was still a British entity. Then, by the time that in a heavily British-influenced country, by the time Gaddafi was out of power, it already had been 25 years under the Mugabe revolution, and that much of the stolen land that used to belong to the British imperialists now was returned back to Zimbabwean people. When Gaddafi took power, it was still still many years to go with the apartheid era in South Africa, and at that time Nelson Mandela, I believe, he had already been sent to prison, but he was very early in his prison term. The movement didn't look like it was anywhere close to actually overthrowing the South African apartheid regime. When Gaddafi left, they were 18 years into the post-apartheid era, and Mandela had already left power, and now Mandela was actually on his way to, he only died 2 years after, a little bit over 2 years after Mandela died. In Europe, many changes had happened. When Gaddafi took power, the Soviet Union still had Leonid Brezhnev, and he was very early into his reign, only 7 years into his reign. By the time that it was ended, Putin was about to take his second presidential term in Russia, non-consecutive. In Western Europe, not much had changed. There were still U.S. puppets, and there was still the only thing the major that changed was the Eurozone had been created, and now we see a lot of these countries trying to leave that failed project that the Eurozone is, and their economies are crumbling like a deck of cards. Now you see Britain and many other countries are trying to talk about leaving. Another country that has been talking about leaving quite a bit, I think, is is France. And there's a lot of people that are getting behind National Front, that is a Eurosceptic party, where people want to leave the EU. Which National Front, I could talk about them a little bit, but it's a can of worms to really describe about what they're about. But we'll just say that they're becoming a force to be reckoned with in France, where Hollande, his power is getting weak, and now National Front is now threatening definitely to take power in 2017, and definitely could change the atmosphere of West Europe, definitely in general. With Arab socialism, the history has continued. Back then, it was Nasser was the first one, and there was also Hafez al-Assad becomes really the second one, where he becomes in power in 1970 and progresses his country forward. And he faces a major threat in 82, but gets his country through it after the Muslim Brotherhood uprising in Hama. We also, I think, fail to realize at times the grand accomplishments of Gaddafi to the full extent of what he did. I mean, he pulled off really what he could have done. He was about to pull off the absolute impossible, which was to actually forever end thousands of years, around 1,000 years of tyranny, of colonization by European powers and the Rothschilds that were behind it, and he was going to finally make a bank for all of Africa, make a country for all of Africa under one currency of the gold dinar, to finally liberate all of Africa from the currency reign of the Rothschilds. An entire Africa against the Rothschilds would have been tremendous to the tide against the New World Order. However, it wasn't allowed. Gaddafi also did many other humanitarian feats, like, for example, his water project that gave water out to the most desolate desert towns, and they were able to start agriculture, booming the middle class of the rural parts of the country, which now the rural parts of the country are in disarray because now they're just fronts for wars going on between the many different armies that are now fighting inside of Libya. And the country almost is in a state of panic and very little order when it comes to there's many people claiming to be the government of Libya. We have two different capitals of Libya, but ultimately, you consider the Zionists and the United States' hands are on all of the bloodshed, mostly. Not mostly, they are on totally behind all the bloodshed and all the tragedy of Libya right now. Also, let's put another thing, and let's talk about another thing, is that well, the Qaddafiists are not done, like the media has claimed. People say that Gaddafi is a thing of the past. He'll never come back, or his family will never come back to power. His supporters will never come back to power. But they are still fighting inside of Libya, and they've been shown they're fighting ISIS inside of Libya. They were fighting Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, which ISIS occupied. Gaddafi loyalists were fighting against ISIS. In Benghazi, there was a huge demonstration of Gaddafi loyalists just back in August, and all across the country, and they continue to have a presence, and they show up every now and then. And the Gaddafi loyalists have been in big battles. They've been heavily repressed by the current Libyan government, which the funny thing is the current Libyan government's not even recognized by a lot of countries because they're a sham. They were a NATO-created entity that stole the Libyans and the Africans of their own will and put in a phony government that will be the puppet of NATO in the West to determine what Libya's future will look like. It's been almost 5 years since the deposal of Gaddafi. He was deposed in August of 2011 and was killed brutally in October of 2011. On October 20th, 2011, Gaddafi was fleeing out of Sirte, his hometown, where rebels, terrorists came after him, and then they chased him down. A lot of us have seen the video where he is brutalized with a knife. Gaddafi is later, after his death, is put into he's later, while he's dying, you see all the pictures of him, and after that he's buried out in the desert somewhere. Was really unknown where Gaddafi's body actually is. Gaddafi died in a very horrible manner, and I think that I think that'll be up to God to give those people who did that to Gaddafi the rightful punishment that they deserve. Gaddafi very very much kept the culture of Libya flourished under Gaddafi, unlike what many people think of socialist leaders as a vacuum sometimes of the when they think of the Eastern Bloc, of the cultures that exist there, and flourished in the Islam, the religion that is most popular in Libya, was treated very well as well as the other religions. And well, of course, there was people will say that Gaddafi was a religious extremist, which ultimately he was. He incorporated some of the Sharia into there, but it was kind of like an intermediary body that determined what the Sharia would be put in there if it actually went with the mission of the Jamahiriya, which was to stay the masses. And I think most of the people supported in 2010 before Gaddafi was deposed, and when he was still out in the public and still was the well-known leader. And there was no question that he was the leader of Libya. I think most of the people supported Gaddafi, but then the uprising happened, and the constructed uprising happened, and NATO bombed the country. And then after that, I think a lot of people just accepted that the Libyans government was going to be overthrown, and that they should get behind the NATO-supported government if they want to stay safe after the overthrow. Now it's almost 5 years later, and it's questionable how many people have been killed by the Libyan Transitional Council. It's funny that they go back to the brutal king's flag that was for the Kingdom of Libya had the same flag with which I think is in a way it's a disgrace to the colors of Africa, which I believe it has all of them on there, red, black, and yellow, and it has the star crescent moon, which Gaddafi's flag was he had two flags. He had the red, white, and black, and then he had the which would signify the Arab unity, and then there was a green flag which signified his vision and the green revolution and his followers and the state of the masses that he created. It was heavily popular throughout the years. Now there's a controversy about Gaddafi is that they say that he was responsible for the Lockerbie bombing, which people remember that as the 88, the Pan Am flight that was shot down between Detroit and New York. A 747 was shot down, and ultimately it was propaganda made it seem like Gaddafi had ordered the attack, the truth was that Gaddafi had never personally ordered for the attack. It was a mistake that he took responsibility for and actually paid out reparations for what had happened. However, which was one of his grand faults, was what happened there. However, he did not personally order the attack, and then there was this propaganda by people against him in 2011 that said that he did personally order the attack, but it was not true. It was complete propaganda by the West in order to make Gaddafi look like a murderous person. Like what they did was the MH17 and spin it like, that was a complete spin, but to make it seem like Putin had done something actually West Ukraine had done. One thing that people forget, a country that people kind of forget about, and it's been a long time, is that I actually didn't really know until recently, is that this country, North Yemen, existed, which at one time Yemen was not the unstable, poorest country in the Middle East that it is now. It was a little bit better off, and it had a little bit more unity at that point when they had Arab socialist leaders there as well. He was, he wasn't as great as the other ones because he was ultimately a military leader that had taken power. But I think he was there. He took power in September 27, 1962. The Revolutionary Committee of Yemen establishes a 5-member presidential council, and at the head of the country is now this leader, and he was the kind of the lesser known face of the Arab socialist movement, but he was another one, and it's kind of weird because now in modern times Yemen looks like could be going back to a similar system and could be going away from the United States terror supporting regime of Hadi that is currently that's still currently trying to fight for power, and and that leader was the one that was the lack of a leader puppet that was in charge of Yemen for many years. Was the one that allowed all the drone strikes to happen in Yemen that killed many innocent people, and he helped support the flourishing of terrorism in his country. And he is still trying to claim that he's in power. He's still trying to act that he's the legitimate leader of Yemen, but it's not true. He ultimately is, or actually, Abd Hadi that's his name. But he resigned on January 22nd, 2015, and he's still trying to act that he's still a legitimate leader when he gave up his power to the Houthis when they stormed his palace. The Houthis are a popular movement amongst the Yemeni people who are fed up with the years of United States imperialism on Yemen. So they rose up and made this movement, and it's a pro-Shia group. It's a pro Well, but I think ultimately they do not really care what sect of Islam people belong to. It's the pro-Shia group. It's a it's a pro-Iran group. It's supported by Iran and Syria, but not really too much to the extent of what the media had claimed they were supported by them as. And Saudi Arabia wouldn't have it because Hadi was very close to Saudi Arabia, and when he was deposed from power and the Houthis took over on February 6, 2015, the Saudis quickly decided that they'll go to any lengths to make sure their ally gets back in power. So they invaded Yemen, and they've been killing many of the Yemeni civilians, doing absolute brutal measures to try to retake power for Hadi. And they've been bombing them. They crossed right across the border into Yemen. It was a full-scale invasion that's happened of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And this war seems to have been forgotten about by the people here in America. They was talked about for a couple of weeks while it started. It was started in March 2015 and it's continued all the way up to now. And the Houthis are trying to hold on to the territory they have, but it's literally like split half and half. Half of Yemen is still back on the old regime, another half stuck on the new Houthis, which stand for the progress and stand for a future away from American imperialism. Imagine that. And then you have this big power to the north invading, and Yemen borders Saudi Arabia, so it was really easy for Saudi Arabia to do their invasion of Yemen, and no one to stop Saudi Arabia. Now Saudi Arabia has been put as the head of the UN Human Rights Committee, which is a joke. It's really absurd that a murderous regime that beheads people, supports ISIS, and everybody knows it, supports terrorism and everybody knows it, and just as blatantly anti-human rights would be put as the chair of the Human Rights Committee. It's just a complete joke, and I think it was just a backstab to Iran. And now Iran and Saudi Arabia have really rifted apart in relations. Now they don't have diplomatic relations with each other, which there's always been the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran is anti-Rothschild, anti-elite. Saudi Arabia is pro-Rothschild, and the elite few control the country. The House of Saud is a membership of 10,000 or so people, of family members, related or loosely related to the King Salman, who's currently in charge of Saudi Arabia. And all these people are given so much special privileges above the regular, and also experience an invasion from justice. And compared to the average Saudi person, that they act like they follow the religious rules they set, but they don't even do that. It's widely known that they party, drink, while you look at a woman wrong in Saudi Arabia, and you get stoned, and not the good stone. You get stoned with rocks, because Saudi Arabia has medieval methods of punishment. And nobody talks about. Well, nobody talks about also Israel as well, where they bomb thousands of Palestinians or kill them in the thousands, injure thousands more, tens of thousands displaced in just 1 month. They kill children on a regular basis. They kill people every day in Palestine. They're putting up a wall. The wall the Palestinians in. They can't even get water. They can't even. They can't go into. Very few can go into Israel to actually get a job. There is no jobs in Palestine. When they're in Israel, they are segregated, and with Jim Crow type segregation. They are. Also, another thing is that people don't realize that there's a Black Lives Matter type movement in Israel forming, because in Israel their blacks are treated well worse than blacks in the United States. In Israel, blacks are treated as like how the South treated blacks before 1964, where they have Jim Crow type segregation, and they sterilized black people there in Israel, and which is probably the most awful thing that they do to the blacks there, where they make sure they can't even have children because they believe them to be of an inferior race. They are not the white Jews that the Israelis hold as the highest racial purity. Israel has so many things reminiscent of the fascism of Hitler, where they have this racial-based code, and if you are not in the select few in the racial club, well, then you are pushed aside as a second-class citizen. They have they go to colonialist methods, justifying every little land grab that they have, but with some silly reason or silly excuse. They say they pretty much almost like was Germany's policy of room to live, where they take all this land, saying that this is necessary. It's like what the Israelis doing by taking all the Palestinian land and saying that's necessary, and they're saying that there's terrorists there. This was a gateway for terrorists there. Now they have taken a part of Syria, the Golan Heights, and what really is going on is that there's a ton of oil there, and that Israel wants their filthy paws all over Syrian oil, and it seems to be, well, of course, one of the big reasons of the West being in the Middle East with wars is the oil and the banking and the untold story of the opium that is being trafficked out of there by the United States military, which the United States government is the biggest drug trader on the planet. They control the drugs, and the war on drugs is not really about them fighting drugs. It's about them wanting to become the monopoly on drugs. And the heroin, cocaine from South America up to the United States, and all these prescription drugs. Well, the United States government gets a lot of money from it, and in the Middle East, what they're doing now in Afghanistan is that they're just importing tons of opium, while they're exporting it to European countries where there's epidemics with heroin addictions, and here to the United States where heroin addictions are becoming a bigger problem. And also, let's not forget that the prescriptions of the prescription companies that want the opium for their pills that are practically like heroin, but it has a different name, and it's synthetic heroin that they're selling to the people and saying this is a cure for any remedy is ridiculous. Saying that for painkillers where marijuana can do that, and it's not lethal if you do just a little too much. And I wish I could have somebody call in today, but call lines are now unavailable for the rest of the show, and we're going to have a little bit of an announcement that's going to be coming up towards the end of the show, so stick around for that, and we'll be still talking about this special show, the story that I'm kind of telling here about this whole movement, this whole thing that is not even talked about here in the West. And there are many things that are not talked about in the West in our media. This bullshit mainstream media that we have here in the United States, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all spreading globalist bullshit, supporting more wars against the anti-Rothschild countries. And there's just a few countries left. And it's funny when truthers even will talk shit about these countries or whatever. The small club, and they want to ostracize even more, or even destroy another country. Another country's resistance to the Rothschilds. I mean, it's like, well, we're self-defeating ourselves there. If we, talking bad about, for example, maybe Raul Castro, or they'll talk bad about Nicolas Maduro, who are both anti-Rothschild. And Venezuela, I mean, there's been so much hate about them in the truth movement recently. But they kicked out the Rothschilds. They got their gold back, and they've They used oil to actually give their people health care, to give their people free education, to give their people housing that was in slums, to give their people that be able to make programs that give literacy to the people that had never had a chance before, and now they have a way higher literacy than they had, way higher literacy than they had before. And I think also in the same way, Syria, with their Arab socialist programs, did many of that kind of things, is that they were able to, a country that was very backwards, they were able to make a lot of people that are illiterate literate. They were able to give education to many people that have never had a chance at education prior to the movement. They were able to they were able to bring health care. They were able to bring in housing, was heavily increasing the residential suburb presence of Damascus. Damascus became a very modern city under the time of Assad, and by 2008 was an extremely modern city. And then when the war happened, that's where it went down, and now Damascus is not nearly as modern now as after there's been bombings than it was before the war. And now Damascus wasn't even as hit as bad as Aleppo. Aleppo has been completely destroyed. An ancient city that it has survived through so much now looks like it might have been conquered. Even though that the rebels are gone and all the foreign invaders are gone from Aleppo, it looks like Aleppo is a completely decimated city. And Raqqa hopefully is not like that at the end of it when the Syrian army finally liberates it, which could be in the next few weeks. But I think that ultimately what will happen is that after the Syrian military makes some advances and actually threatens to push out all the foreign invaders out of their country, the United States is going to try to step in and try to say that we'll invade if this goes any further. Like what happened in 2013, Assad had a very good chance of actually kicking out all these foreign invaders, but then the United States came in and threatened invasion, said, hey, you're using chemical weapons, which the UN couldn't even prove that the chemical weapons had been used by the Syrian government and were neutral on the issue. Most indications went to that the Syrian rebels had used chemical weapons and even have posed as chemical weapons in YouTube videos. Syrian rebels, who rely, just like their ISIS counterparts, heavily on internet propaganda, I think partially they do that kind of stuff just trying to scare people, because ultimately I think they have a different appeal in Syria than what these fake liberals or whatever that are supporting the Syrian rebels. Here there in Syria, the people that join the Syrian rebels, they're Islamist extremists. They're really just people addicted to killing. These are very dark motherfuckers that are in the Syrian rebels, the Syrian terrorists. These people, and I think also some of them are just fascists, that kind of stuff, that want to see a government that'll cater to whatever corporate interests that they're involved in or whatever banking interests they're involved in. But the Syrian army has so many different forces inside of it that are fighting for the same cause. There's so many different types of people. There's from Muslims of the Shia, to the sect, to the Sunni sect, to Christians, to people that are not religious, to maybe even there's probably a few Jewish people that are even in the Syrian military, to all kinds of different peoples in there, and there's people that are darker skinned. Well, there's probably a few black Syrians. There's people with darker brown skin, more of a lighter skin, to even white Syrians, that have a lot of European blood in them. They don't see stuff like that. What they see is the Syrian people against terrorism that's being funded by DC, being funded by Tel Aviv, being funded by all these outside entities, and the Syrian army is trying to stand up for the sovereignty of their country. It's ultimately a Rothschild attack on them because they are anti-Rothschild, and they're also very strongly anti-Zionist, which the Rothschild's baby is Israel, and Israel menace to the Middle East, them pointing 411 nuclear weapons at the direction of whoever they deem a threat, was it 410, whatever it is, while the Syrian military has always called out the Israeli crimes and also called out what they've done to the Palestinian people. And the Israelis don't like that kind of criticism, and they'll call it anti-Semitism. But that's an ad hominem attack, because anti-Semitism, okay, number one, you're saying that any criticism on Israel is anti-Jewish, which is saying that Israel represents all Jews, number one. Number two, Semitic people, most of the Israeli people are not Semitic. They're Ashkenazis, which are from Europe, and they came from the kingdom of Khazaria way back when in Khazaria was an instance where was actually pagans were about to be conquered by either Muslims or Christians. They decided to be Jewish, and they were left alone. And then later all these descendants lived in Eastern Europe, and then after World War II they colonized the Palestinian land, and then they made the full state of Israel. The Israeli government is also made up of Ashkenazi Jews. There isn't the Semitic people are actually the Palestinians that they are bombing. They're Semitic and always have been there, and you can tell by how they look, like people that actually are from the Middle East. These are the Semitic people. So really, the Israeli government are the ones that could be accused of that. The Israeli government are killing Semites. And also, don't forget that the Palestinians, it's not just Muslims that are being attacked in Palestine, it's also Christians. And the Zionists see Christians in a very bad light, because that's not with their doctrine of Zionism. Zionism is much like fascism. It's another doctrine of evil. Which Israel is also, as well as being Zionist, is also a fascist country where corporations, the state, have a merger of power, and they use a state apparatus to oppress anybody who goes against the will of the government. Which there's a lot of people in Israel that are, well, there's not a lot of people, but there's some in Israel that are against the Israeli oppression of Palestine, and they're treated pretty badly. In Syria, the overwhelming majority knows what's going on. 81% of the country knows about the New World Order. They're educated. Assad actually made a country educated about that and educated about important things. People think that American people are educated, but they're not educated about really anything important. And they don't really have their education that they're supposed to be receiving is not very effective. And you see, with a country with a lot of people reading at a third grade level. We see a country with a lot of people that are just end up in the long run not being very intelligent, or lacking critical thought is the major thing. They can't analyze these fallacies that the media is putting out there, and they believe the lies when they were talking about Gaddafi, believe the lies when they're talking about now Assad, or talking about Rouhani and the Iranian government, or talking about the Houthis down in Yemen, which could be now the third country in the resistance to the New World Order plan for the Middle East. Iran is also another country that somewhat displayed a sort of Arab socialism, even though they're not an Arab country. Iran has used somewhat of these kind of socialist measures in order to keep the banks in check, and they can't they can't put over a certain interest rate in Iran. They keep corporations in check, and they don't really let them get too much power. And the Iranian people, they make sure the Iranian people, the poor people, are taken care of. And the Iranian government has actually brought a much unity of the country, and also a country where all different kinds of thoughts and ideas are allowed to be freely expressed in Iran. And the idea that Iran doesn't have freedom of speech is completely wrong. And anybody that's ever visited there, and I had actually Press TV guy, Caleb Maupin, who I communicate quite regularly with on Facebook. He's been to Iran a couple times. He's told me these kind of things, even though that Iran is not really in support of Marxism. The government of Iran is not really in support of Marxism, or is not really in support of communism. They have that kind of literature inside of Iran that you can read. Even though you can also get a hold of the pro-American side, if that's what is fancies you. You can get that as well in Iran. Or they're at least allowed to express those kind of opinions, which they must be getting those kind of opinions from somewhere. I imagine that they're probably getting it from media of different sorts. Iran has been a very great example of of the people overthrown after just so many years of United States interference. They overthrew the Shah and brought in out of exile Ayatollah Khamenei, who the people loved. Ayatollah Khamenei loved the people, and the people loved him. They were teamed up as a country, and they were able to stand through some major challenges. The invasion by at the time, United States supported Iraq of Saddam Hussein. That's why some people in the activist community go to the extent of supporting Saddam Hussein, and they say, well, Saddam Hussein was ultimately a U.S. puppet, and he did his job, and he caused a lot of strife in the Middle East, and he invaded Iran, a country that's actually truly anti-Rothschild. Iran also faced another test, which was during the 80s, which was the United States pressure on them, and which they suffered a lot of. And Iran also was put in a difficult circumstance. They were put where they had, they were almost expected to pick one side of the Cold War, the United States or the Soviet Union. They picked neither side of the Cold War, which is like what Nasser did, or what Gaddafi did, or what leader of North Yemen did. They didn't. These Arab socialists before that did not pick a side in the Cold War, and now we'll talk a little bit about Syria and Hafez al-Assad. Hafez al-Assad is very impressive. His story. He's he's impressive because Hafez al-Assad wasn't really expected in 1960 for something like this to happen. And it seemed like Syria was kind of disarray after the split away from the United Arab Republic, which was between Nasser had brokered a country between Egypt and Syria where they could, while they had a unified country, and it really did show the Arab solidarity across the region. However, it ultimately fell apart, and after that, the country was in a little bit of a difficult circumstance. They didn't know exactly what to do, but then the coup happened, which was relatively nonviolent, and after the coup happened, it paved the way for Hafez al-Assad to take over. And Hafez al-Assad, belonging to the Arab socialist ideology, brought a fresh look at Syria, and he slowly and quickly moved forward with his country, and he was not really in support of the Soviet Union, but he had closer ties with the Soviet Union, I guess, than, for example, Gaddafi had, or the Khamenei had later. But he had very strong relations. He's the one who established a very strong relations between Iran and Syria, and he was quoted as saying that, when they were asking him, why would you you're an Arab socialist, why would you take the side of a Persian country over an Arab country, which Saddam Hussein was originally part of the same Ba'ath movement. However, he had split away. There was two different factions. Really, the legitimate successor of the original party was the Syrian version. Iraqi was a bastardized version that was based on Saddam Hussein's quest for power. Saddam did not really care about his people. He was ultimately a U.S. puppet. He only cared about his own power, and Saddam invaded Iran, and this is what Hafez al-Assad had to say, is that there will come a time when when Iran will be the only country to come to our help, while the Arab countries stab us in the back. And that's exactly what's happening in Syria right now under his son Bashar al-Assad and his power. The power of the Syrian people is now being threatened by all these Arab countries that they stab in the back while they support terrorism, and while they support the Zionist plan against them. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, for the most part, Libya today, the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. They're all in support of the incursion into Syria by these Western powers, and trying to put their puppet dictator that would be the result of this constructed uprising, if they came to power. And the Free Syrian Army will say that, well, we started off as peaceful. We started off as just as demonstrators, as protesters, but they always had a violent intention, and they were always part of the United States pocketbooks. And no matter what people have to say, is that they were never a group that was actually looking out for the good of Syria. This is the discussion on this, about Syria. It's really divided in the activist circles, and I've seen people that call themselves activists. They'll be 100% in support of these rebels that are ultimately bloody terrorists, and I can't take those people seriously, because the Syrian people, they say that 70% of them are in support of Assad. 88% of them voted for Assad. They don't want these terrorists to take charge. They don't want a Sharia law state like they have in Saudi Arabia, where women can't even drive. Women have very good rights in Syria. How many countries can you say that allow women to, in the Middle East, allow women to wear bikinis on the beach? Iran, despite what people think Iran was their rights on women, actually is a lot looser than Saudi Arabia or Qatar. I don't know I think they're allowed to wear bikinis on the beach there in Iran, which is, I say that's somewhat of a standard of how reasonable you are with women's rights to some extent. I mean, I would say that's a little measure. It's not the ultimate measure, but it's definitely a way to see, especially when we're talking about Middle Eastern countries where the exposure of a woman is a lot. They believe that's giving them too much liberty when you allow them to expose themselves to whatever extent. And in Iran, Syria, they allow that. I think Egypt, they allow that. I'm not sure, but in Saudi Arabia, no, of course not. They still wear what I would say the beekeeper suit. Some people might be offended by that, but that's what I have to call it. It's the total body covering, the burqa and the hijab. And Qatar, I believe, is like that. Just the lack of rights that these countries have in general compared to Syria, where religions are all treated equally. In Iran, Christians and Jews are treated well as well, and it's the Israelis backstab the Iranian Jews. Or also, these are true Jews, so these are not the fakes that call themselves followers of Moses. However, go against all of the 10 commandments of what they do in Israel, or go against a few of the commandments. The Jews in Iran are Jewish followers. However, they are not in favor of the Zionist regime, and they actually are loyal to Khamenei. The fact that there was a problem, though. There was some Iranian Jews that were actually found out to be Mossad agents, but that's not the majority of them. The majority of Iranian Jews are in favor of the Iranian government, and there's a reported supposedly that atheism is not exactly accepted. I guess that might be more of a societal standard. of why in the Iranian culture, and that's in Iran. But I think that what we can make out of this show is that the Arab socialism is a movement that's not talked about on our media, but it's very impressive what it has done for the region. It's very Arab socialism is very impressive for what it did over the last 50, 60 years of the prominence of the ideology in the in the Middle East, and I think that'll continue. It's actually coming back with the Houthis, I think, or will show somewhat of that. Will show somewhat of that movement, and the Iranians. I think they'll bring back Ahmadinejad, and that very strong anti-Zionist stance that he had will return to the government of Iran once I think he'll run again in 2017 for next year when he has a chance of retaking power next summer in Iran. He was in power for 8 years, which they have term limits, so he couldn't run again in 2013, and then Rouhani took power, which I don't think, I think Rouhani is a little bit too weak on some issues, and I think that they need somebody strong like Ahmadinejad to guide him through these tough times that are coming up ahead, which one of the tough times might be talking about war with the United States, which that's definitely where that's where everything's pointing to when the United States seems to be so adamant on war in Syria, which is where the Iranians will have no choice but to engage the United States if they're engaging Syrian army in massive numbers. It's already started. There's already been skirmishes. It's just when does this go full blown? World War III is very likely, you could say, you've already seen the start of it. You've already lived through the start of World War III. We are experiencing it now as we watch these events unfold in Syria. And what we actually right now, these last few days, is really a cool down of the World War III. And it looks like that maybe the World War III won't actually happen. But what will happen is that's going to flare up, I believe, in Syria again at some point. The United States will invade eventually, and I think the Syrians they are prepared for that, but I think they should definitely not be naive like Gaddafi was somewhat in some ways, that they won't do it to his country, and they did in 2011. NATO bombed his country, and Assad can't be like that and believe that the United States won't actually go into Syria and bomb his country. But it will happen. They don't care. They don't care who. What kind of image they'll leave. The United States is much like the Nazis of the past, and they had, and it's very similar what they did to the Nazis did in the Middle East as what the United States is doing in the Middle East. But the United States what they're doing in the Middle East is much more severe. Anyways, we're in the last 2 minutes of the show before we hit the bumpers. It is here's a big announcement coming out right now. Here's the one I was going to bring up earlier in the show, is that the next show that I'm doing will be dedicated to Hugo Chavez, as we will be marking on Saturday the 3rd anniversary of his death. On March 5th, 2013, Hugo Chavez passed from a long fight from cancer. And like the last 2 years, I'm going to do a tribute to Chavez on a show. At least a whole show will be dedicated to Chavez. The haters can say what they want. The haters can talk shit, but do the research and listen to the show. He was definitely a man that stood for the Venezuelan people and against the international bankers. And it looks like that there's many theories that he might have paid the ultimate price for it, and that's why he died from such a brutal cancer that he was suffering from, and also many other South American leaders were suffering from cancer at the same time. So take from what you want from that.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, that commented, kill the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down